Start that now. All right. Good evening. I'm Chelsea Gauthier. I'm the Utah Main Street Program Manager and Statewide Coordinator. And today we are here with Karlee Stauffer, who is our Grants Administrator, and Jansen Bennett, who is a Preservation Architect for the State Historic Preservation Office. Tonight we're going to be going over a new grant program that Utah Main Street is proud to be offering, entitled Revive and Reside Grant. You're mainly going to be hearing from Karlee and a bit from Jansen. I'll be in the background trying to field some of your questions, but we're excited to get this out for you.
Yes, thank you, Chelsea. And thank you, Jansen, also for being here. Jansen will have all the answers to the technical and architectural questions. I'll go ahead and get started just to give you an idea of what we're planning on going over tonight. We're going to be talking about the Revive and Reside grant program, how to determine if you're eligible, what you need to apply, where to find those documents, and all of that information. And like Chelsea said, we're super excited to be here. This is the first grant of this type that Utah Main Street has ever offered. So a lot of thought and care has gone into creating this program so that it can benefit your communities the most that it can. So really excited to be talking about it and be here with everyone. So I'll jump right into it. I'm not going to bury the lead. The big information is that applications are going to be opening next week on Wednesday, February 5th. And that's going to be applications for both the rural and urban sides of the Revive and Reside grant program. I will just caveat that slightly. Anyone who's paying attention to the news right now, there's some stuff going on with federal funds, so we are moving forward as planned, but if things change, we'll keep you informed. Okay, so really quickly, what is the Revive and Reside grant program? The Revive and Reside grant program really has one overarching vision, which is to fund improvements to interior spaces of historic buildings in Utah's communities. And what that means more specifically is we're looking at those interior spaces that are underutilized right now, the ground floors being turned into commercial spaces and the upper floors being turned into housing. So if you have a project similar to that, that's the direction we're going in. It's important to know the Revive and Reside grant program, that is an umbrella name for two buckets. So we have the Rural Revive and Reside program, and I'll get into the details of that one, and the Urban Revive and Reside. So the Rural Revive and Reside, the money comes from federal funds. So even though your checks would be made out from the state of Utah, the money is coming from the National Park Service, and so they're passing through us. They are still considered federal funds when you receive them. Because of that, there are some additional federal guidelines and requirements to be aware of with the rural program, which we'll talk about. With the urban program, that's state funding that's coming directly from Utah Main Street. And so there are going to be some different requirements as well, and some state laws that come into effect on this one. So we will talk about how you determine whether you're rural or urban under this program. But really quickly, just getting into the differences. The rural program, like I said, is going to be subject to the National Parks oversight. You won't be able to use federal funds as matching funds unless it's CDBG. And then with the state funding, with the urban program, that's going to be limited to urban communities, and I'm using that term in a general sense, but I will get specific as to what that means for our grant program and how you determine that in a few slides. There is not National Park Service oversight for this one, but things like we will need you to disclose any state funds that are involved in the project, and there are a few differences involved in that one. So what kinds of projects are eligible for the funding? Like I said, we're looking at interior spaces and getting those utilized, getting them engaged in the downtown district. So rehabilitation work on the ground floors to commercial spaces, rehabilitation works on the upper floors to residential spaces. And what that looks like can be fairly creative. For like a commercial space, it could be something like a boutique or a restaurant or a bakery. And for an upper floor space, we're keeping it at residential. What that looks like, what makes sense for your building and your community, can be different. Some specific work items of things that would be eligible. So repairing or rehabilitating original interior architectural features would be eligible. Installing or repairing a fire suppression system, code required accessibility updates on the interior, electrical or plumbing upgrades, flooring repair and replacement, and repair of restorable windows are all just some examples. And then some things that aren't going to be eligible, we've gotten a lot of questions about facades. So this grant's really focusing on interiors. So exterior repairs won't be eligible. Facades won't be eligible. This grant can't fund new building construction. It also can't fund reconstruction of historic properties that no longer exist. And also a really important item is it can't fund work that was completed prior to the grant project period. So how much funding is there per project? Our maximum funding award amount is $50,000 and the minimum award amount is $25,000. And we will talk about the grant scoring sheet. There is a preference for projects that are applying for the maximum amount, but you can still apply if you are needing less. It does require a 25% match. So that 25% can be a cash match or it can be an in-kind contribution. For example, if you're applying for $50,000, then you would have to have $12,500 in matching funds. And while in-kind contributions are allowed, they do have to be directly associated with the project scope of work and they have to be eligible activities under the grant. The Rural Revive and Reside Grant program is completely reimbursement based. Because we're dealing with federal funds, it has to be reimbursement based. So that's an important thing to know. On the urban side, if you're awarded, we will have a conversation on a case-by-case basis about the disbursement schedule. Okay, so that's a general idea of what the grant program is, the types of projects we're looking for to apply. Now I'm going to get into who can apply. So property owners of historic buildings or tenants of historic buildings. And the historic buildings do need to be located within the designated boundaries of a Tier 2 Utah Main Street Historic District. And when we say property owner, we're using that term in a general sense. So a property owner can be an individual, a corporation, or a nonprofit. However, if they are a corporation or a nonprofit, there is some additional documentation necessary. So you will need a resolution from the board of directors authorizing the signer of the application on behalf of the corporation or the nonprofit. And then if it's the tenant of the historic building who's applying, they would need to have the property owner's signature of consent to the scope of work, just so everyone is informed and on board about the grant project. Okay, something else you need to think about when you're determining if you can apply, and this is kind of the most important thing, so if you hear nothing else tonight, this is the important thing, is you need to know if you're rural or if you're urban. Because like I've said, there are different guidelines and requirements for the rural grantees versus the urban grantees. So how do you determine that? We use the USDA's Rural Development website, and that is a requirement of the National Park Service. So you would go to this link, and I have a screenshot here so you can see where I did it before. You go to this link, it'll pull up a map, and then you type in the name of your community, and then a pop-up will appear, and it will either say address is eligible or address is ineligible, which is scary, but if it says address is ineligible, that doesn't mean you aren't eligible for the grant program. It means that you would be considered an urban community. And so you would need to apply using the urban grant program documents and the urban application. If you put your community into this map and it says address is eligible, that means that you would apply with the rural grant packet and the rural application. So eligible means apply using the rural documents. Ineligible means apply using the urban documents. Okay, something else when it comes to determining eligibility of your historic building, you need to know if you're within the boundaries of a Tier 2 Utah Main Street district. And you need to know what the National Register of Historic Places designation is of that building. So some of you will probably just know what the National Register status is, but if not, using the hub can be a good way to get an idea of that. So the hub is created by SHPO, and hopefully, is everyone seeing the hub screen now? Excellent. Okay. It's the Historic Utah Buildings GIS map. And so you would go to that link on the PowerPoint, and I'll share all the links at the end. So you come on here, and then there is this layers tool. And there's this Utah Main Street Program Districts layer. So that's the one you're going to click because you need to be in a Tier 2 Utah Main Street district in order to apply. The historic building does. So then you would just put in the name of your community. Let's say Mount Pleasant. Oh, there's a lot of those. Okay. Great. So I've typed in Mount Pleasant, Utah, and then you can scroll in, and this layer here is showing the boundaries of the Utah Main Street Program District. So if your building is within there, there's a good chance you're eligible.
And Carly, I don't know if the historic properties are showing up for some reason on that for the layers. Should have the districts and the in addition to Main Street.
Oh, the historic district?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I have seen it. I have seen those.
That will also tell you if your property is listed on the National Register or if it's in an eligible historic district, like a contributing building.
Let me try loading it in one more
Sorry
time.
for technical difficulties here, folks.
Let's. All right, we're going back to Mount Pleasant, everyone. And then layers. Oh, there we go. Okay, so there was some glitch, but so you can see the Utah Main Street program districts right here, but you can also see, like Chelsea mentioned, this Historic Utah Buildings Historic District. So that's the kind of more gray layer. And then you can also, they're not popping up, but generally if you have this layer selected, it will have pins for all the historic buildings, and then you can click on your building, and it will bring up the National Register designation. So that's an option. Okay. So that is for eligibility. Are we back on the PowerPoint? Great. Okay. So once you have figured out whether you're considered rural or urban, you know that you're in the program district and the historic district, you know your National Register designation, you have a great project vision. How do you apply? What do you need for an application? The first thing we recommend you do is read and review our grant program packets. So those will be up on the website. We have some up right now, but don't use those. There's a slight error on the deadline, but you can use, I will provide the correct links. Okay. So this is the grant packet. This one is for the rural. So again, you'll want to triple check that you have the right program packet, and just showing you the table of contents right now. There's a lot of information, detailed information here about what you would need to apply, what documents you need, details on projects, and then things that I think you will find really useful. There's going to be a sample application. Because the applications aren't open yet, we don't have the application forms on the website, but you can look at the sample. We'll have a copy of the preservation agreement, which is something we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation, and then the sample grant score sheet. So you can see how we will be scoring the applications and get an idea of how to write your application, and then also a sample template, budget template. Okay. Moving from too many different windows. Are we back on the PowerPoint? Excellent. Okay, thank you. So that's what the grant program packet is going to look like. And I will share those links so everyone can look at those for both rural and urban. The next thing we'd recommend is consulting with us, consulting with Jansen and myself if you have questions about what's needed for the grant. If you have questions, if your project is going to fit specifications, reach out to us. We're happy to provide feedback. Okay, like I said, you can see the sample application, so you can read through all of the questions that will be asked on that form and start thinking through how you would answer them. An important item is going to be something that you want to get started. Even if you're not 100% sure if you're going to apply, I would recommend that you create a unique entity identifier number. So that is required by the federal government for anyone who's getting federal funds. So for the rural grantees, you have to apply with this UEI number because you could potentially be receiving federal funds. And yeah, here we go. In order to get the UEI number, you have to have an EIN, which is Employer Identification Number from the IRS. So you would start by applying for an EIN using this link. You can do it online. It's a fairly quick process. And we will have a tutorial both on how to get the EIN and how to get the UEI up on our website next week prior to applications opening. So if you don't know how to do this, don't worry. We will have a step-by-step process on it. It just will take a little bit of time, so it's good to get the jump on getting these numbers before applying. Okay, this is just an example. This is the budget template, which is in the program documents. So you can take a look at that, get a sense of what kind of information we're looking for in the budget. Something to keep in mind when you're getting contractor estimates for the work you want done, you will need to show that you have requested estimates from multiple contractors, unless there is only one contractor nearby that does that kind of work. Okay, how long will the projects have? For actual construction, they'll have between 2 to 3 years to complete all those deliverables, and there will be a specific timeline in the grant contract for each project. This is just a timeline view. So like I said, applications are opening on Wednesday, February 5th. They're going to be open for a little bit under 45 days, so March 21st is the deadline. It will take about 30 days or so of review. You'll hear within 30 days whether or not you've been awarded, and then we will go into the contracting phase. For the urban program, that'll be a conversation with Utah Main Street and the awardee. For the rural program, there will be some extra NPS review time in there, so that might be a little bit longer. What strings are attached with the program? There will be required monthly status updates, just short updates with some photos. Also, biannually, you'll have to submit a report. That would be a more comprehensive report. All the projects will have to meet the Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation. The rural projects will have to go through the NEPA process. And then all projects will need to enter into a preservation agreement for a term of at least 5 years. And we have the preservation agreement in the packet, so you can look over it, ask us any questions about what that means for you and the historic building. But the main idea behind the preservation agreement is just that for 5 years, you can't do anything that would damage or alter the National Register character defining features of the building. I think that's right, Jansen, correct me. Okay, great. All right, so if you're interested, what should you do next? You can sign up for our contact form, and I'll put that link. We'll make sure that link is available to everyone. Review those guidelines. Make sure you're reviewing the rural or the urban one, depending on your community. Reach out to us with questions, and then submit your application and your materials. Okay. So I think that leaves us with some time for questions. Have we received any?
We haven't received any questions so far, so if you do have any, feel free to use the chat. I think I can also, if you raise your hand as an attendee, I think I can allow you to talk if you want to ask questions that way as well.
Okay, and I am putting into the chat the links to the rural grant packet and the urban grant packet.
And I also threw in there the hub, so it's hub.utah.gov. I think it might have been doing something with the share screen, why it wasn't showing all of the properties, because I was working on my other screen when I was testing it. And then the USDA site for eligibility if you're rural or urban. And then if there are additional property owners in your Main Street districts that might be interested in this, we will have this recorded and we will share it with the Main Street network. But feel free to reach out to any one of us. Karlee is taking lead on all grant application questions. If you have questions specifically for Jansen regarding any architectural details, please. We will put, I think you had that slide again, Karlee, just with our email addresses that if anybody wanted that.
Yeah, I'll put that up.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I will just emphasize that the consultation with us is going to be beneficial for any interested property owners. Not only can we kind of go and hear what the property owner wants to do and tell them whether or not we think it will be, a good candidate. We can help them talk about like whether or not it currently is National Register contributing or not, and go through kind of all of those intricacies. But we can also kind of give them guidance on how to kind of shorten the review periods by which documentation they provide in their application. So I will just want to underline that.
Thank you, Jansen. Any other questions this evening? We know that you guys probably want to get back to your dinner and family time. So if you don't have any further questions tonight, just feel free to email us and we'll look forward to seeing applications starting and questions starting next week. So thanks so much, everybody.